The other point about this model is we sometimes complain about business models being linear. Well, if it is cyclic, where do the ends touch? And it really happens at the bottom, in the base of automation. There's a question in automation of whether or not that automation thing that I'm doing without much thought is simplistic or elegant. And I think Oliver Wendell Holmes captured it best. He said, I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my right arm for the simplicity on the far side of complexity. He was talking about and acknowledging the difference between simplicity and elegance, having the knowledge of all the things that were considered before we come back to something that seems simple. Here's a quick example. Let's say we found a bomb in the room. We're watching the countdown get to about 10 seconds. And I say, you know what? Don't clip the blue wire. Clip the red wire. So it's a simple instruction. Clip the red wire. But is it a simple or elegant solution? Was it based on a coin toss or years of experience? And this is where we find that even generationally, we are always in one of these phases, and we skip to the next phase as traditions may be based on elegance and a long history of things. But when tradition is viewed as simplistic because we've lost sight of the knowledge that built up to that point of elegance, we enter into simplicity again, and that's how history repeats itself. Now, given how the mind naturally tries to learn and go through and solve a problem and come back down into elegance, we have to compare that to what we do in traditional education. I call it the half-pipe instruction. You ever heard the term drill and practice? Everyone's heard that term. You ever wonder why it's two words? First time you have a fire drill, it's a drill. 10th time, it's practice. Same with education and training. Here's what works. We've already figured it out. Here's what works. Now go try it. And when we put people in a classroom and say, okay, we already figured out what works, just memorize this and do that from K-12 and send them out into a job and say, now become the next thought leader, we understand why that's not working and business innovation is suffering. There's a connection gap between the needs of business, who are actually the customers of our education system, and our methods there. So if we want inventive learning, not productive learning, we're going to have to go over the top. This half-pipe thinking was great for the industrial age. We're preparing World War II soldiers. Factory workers worked great for the industrial age. Not so much for the knowledge economy. So the other thing we'll hit real quickly is the 8 degrees of reason, and looking at the reasons that we give. And there's really only 8 reasons underlying every explanation. Actually, you've seen these before. The very top and bottom are questions and reactive. So what's in the middle are just basically elaboration on the idea of what our reflective reasons are. So at the bottom, we have reactive reasons. Why did you do that? Well, I wanted to. And we start working up to the third level. Well, because that's what it is by definition. You've probably heard people explain things that way. By definition, that's what it is. Reason by entity, and so forth. So let's hit another slide to hit this again. Maybe example will help. If I said, why did your dog bark? Well, at the bottom, reactive answer is he wanted to. And that's a little bit different than the entity level that says that's what dogs do. And that's different than reasoning that says, let's see if someone's outside. And then questioning at the top says, how do you know he barked? Let's hit it from another angle. These are famous reasons. 9/11 was due to a failure of imagination. Reasoning, either Pluto is not a planet or we have hundreds of planets. Responsibility, the cold weather caused the Challenger's O-rings to crack. Sequenced, everything there's a season. State, Sutton robs banks because that's where the money is. One of the things we see about humor is that when we expect an answer to come from one degree of reason and it actually comes from another, we would expect to hear an answer that of prescriptive, the goal behind why he robs banks. But when it's put into another one, it actually generates humor. He robs banks because the state level reason is that's where the money is. An entity answer is don't worry because the Titanic is, by definition, an unsinkable ship. And prescriptive, what we should do, what our policy is. Our government's policy is not to negotiate with terrorists. And then reactive is the pilot's glider training, the training, making it reactive, led to a safe landing in the Hudson River. And one last slide, just to really hit this idea home that there's really only 8 reasons. Throughout history, we've had different people really help us understand these reasons to why that we give. And so we've hit definitions a few times. You see in the middle there, Webster really influenced the idea that we could all come back with an answer by definition. At the top, we have Socrates, who gave us Socratic method, the way to ask questions, ask a question from that question, try to get to the base of what you really actually know and what it's based on. And at the bottom, B.F. Skinner gave us a lot of information on why we react, as he would say, like pigeons. If you have enough bird seed, you can get people to do anything if you're acting in a reactive mode. So the next point is that these are not 8 things that you kind of pull out of thin air and maybe there's 9. That these 8 reasons actually fit in a model that was described hundreds of years ago by Immanuel Kant, a philosopher of reason, that said, here's how reason should work. That they all work together in a model. And we see questioning has to balance with some resolution. And that resolution is reactive or reflective. That reflective resolution is prescriptive or descriptive. If it's descriptive, it's an entity or an event, and so forth. And we break it on down. And this inference relationship, you can really think of as the roads between cities. When you have inference relationships, it's a way to infer and get from one place to another. These aren't just independent categories. And even within each one of them, we see that questioning at its basis is a question of curiosity or conviction. It's different asking you, where were you last night, than saying, isn't it true you were out last night? In the middle, we see entity. We probably heard these words, familiar with the idea that there's an inference relationship between singularity and set, and also between form and function as our reasons. And next to that, state, the situation. If knowing that without knowing the need doesn't really tell me the context. And underlying that is, okay, if I know the context, is it changing or is it the same? So let's go through a quick example. I won't go through the whole script, but a virtual bot conversation. Now that we've built up this idea of a map. So if I say, I'm feeling sad, my bot might come back and say to me, more sad than usual? And I said, yeah, I have a new job and I'm going to miss my old friends. And it would say, maybe the change will be do you good. So right away, I won't read the rest of the script. You start to realize that this is kind of a different approach than looking for independent answers. I found an answer to that question. I found something to say that people always say to that question. It's really looking at, as I have on the right-hand side, a recognition of the situation and a negative emotion. And here we see that for each of these reason types, we can use it just like GPS. If you're programming AI for GPS, you have a map. It has roads that connect pieces. You know where you are. You recognize that. You recognize the destination. And now use the same probabilistic capability in AI to move us somewhere on a map. And it starts with understanding these generic attributes that each reason has. Reasons have intrinsic predictive capabilities, intentional inputs and outputs. Sometimes reasons come together and collide in ways that collaborate versus compete. And then reasons are related to specific feelings. Instead of thinking of cognitive versus emotions, they're related in very specific ways. So the situation feeling that is negative at the bottom that we saw was sad. So once I recognize where I am, infer that I want to get you to a place, maybe not happy, but at least the idea of solution, then I start plotting a map to get you there. So the idea of a sentiment is how I feel about versus an emotion is how I feel. So that's the basic idea, and we're just about out of time. So quick conclusion really is that OCR, optical character recognition, OCR work because of the R. We have to recognize. And you can recognize in time with the question when, recognize on a map with the question where, but we should also be able to move in a direction where we're recognizing where we are inside of an explanation when we're answering the question to why. And when we do that, that's going to move us past the information age into the explanation age. It's going to take moving beyond productive feedback and learning and into inventive feedback and learning. It's going to take pioneers, and I think I'm looking at them in this room today. Thank you. Okay.
Artificial general intelligence. Have you thought about going to any of those conferences? There's a whole community that's working on roadmap for high-level artificial intelligence they call artificial general intelligence.
That's right.
Which
yeah.
actually doesn't have a lot of practical implementation.
Yes, it's on my roadmap. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you could make a template with two pages back. You had on your slideshow, you had a bunch of, this giant grid. If you could make a template in AMO, you could probably get people to start using your system immediately.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to come today, just to try to not to try to start from scratch and write all the code and figure all this out, but to figure out how this work might plug into all the other work that's happening, and to see how collaboration might work around that. Great point.